Thank you, Dorothea, for the eye-opening and thought-provoking keynote address. Now we've got a panel on navigating the green transition, strategies and solutions for a sustainable shipping industry. It'll be moderated by Ole Christian Schroder, and the speakers on the panel are Jeanne Grasso, Makar, Hamish Norton, and Apostolos Zampelas.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Dorothea, for a very inspiring speech. That was a nice way to start the day and start this conference and the theme of the conference. It's good to see a very nice crowd here today. And again, thank you so much for coming to our conference. I don't need to remind the people in this room that shipping is definitely faced with numerous challenges these days from all angles. One being the present state of our industry, leading to the topic of navigating the green transitions. The elephant in the room is, of course, the discussion about alternative fuel, what, where, when, and how. But that's being debated later in another panel, so we're not going to go specifically into that topic for now. What we will discuss is, however, the interim period, and with the present fleet structure that we have today and are sailing around the world, we will have a debate with the panel on various aspects of that. The reality is that there is a substantial part of the fleet being modern and mid-age, which is most likely will not replace propulsion or make big investment on that part, but will need to be as efficient as possible. That's kind of the challenge that's needed to what can we do to overcome that part. For new buildings, there's no easy answers. It's very challenging what to order today. And for older ships, there's probably not enough payback to make big investment cases. The reality is that 45% of all new buildings placed in 23 were for vessels that were able to use alternative fuels, mostly LNG. But the big question is, in today's market, how many are really running on gas? And not to forget that there's many additional aspects and side to the green effect of today's LNG. The challenge is to be in the running to get access to alternative fuels in the future, especially as society faces fossil fuel out. But in the meantime, some owners believe that a lot can be done with the present fleet, with increased efficiency and consequently cut emission. So to discuss these topics, we have this great panel here today, as well as our friend Apostolos Zampelas from Greece. So welcome on Teams. It seemed to be working out okay. I hope you can hear us, and we will hopefully hear from you. So the panel, they don't need any further introduction. Their bios are in the magazine, but it's well known to everybody in this room, so I'm not going to spend time on that. But why don't we start with Makar, the brain in IMO, representing Marshall Island. He is the expert of the IMO activities, so why don't we start the whole thing off with you, Nick?
Okay. On that introduction, I'm not sure what to say now. Well, I think probably the important reflection, and again, it's not old news really, is recently last year, the IMO had revised and adopted its GHG strategy, or its strategy to address the reduction of GHG emissions from international shipping. We know about the improvement or the increase in the ambition of the targets, the addition of additional checkpoints, as well as the acceleration of the development of midterm measures that are intended to put regulations and measures in place that are set to put the industry on a trajectory in line with reductions in line with temperature agreements of the Paris Agreement. So after the adoption of that strategy, there's probably in direct connection with that four sort of key developments that are taking place right now. The first, of course, is the development of this basket of midterm measures. What we do know is it's going to be a global fuel standard that would be incorporated to some degree with some form of a carbon pricing measure. We don't know exactly what the carbon pricing mechanism is going to look like at this point. It's still under consideration, and there are future meetings of the MEPC as well as intersessional working groups that are going to be working on further hammering out and coming to preliminary agreements on what these things should look like. In connection with that, one of the guiding principles of this strategy is for informed decision making, and part of that then, of course, is undertaking an impact assessment. So in other words, an assessment of the impacts on both ships as well as states in terms of what these measurements, when instituting these measures, what are these impacts going to be, so that any adverse, disproportionate negative impacts can be appropriately addressed. That's being undertaken and overseen by a steering committee. This steering committee's already met twice. This steering committee will eventually, it'll give its interim report at the next MEPC meeting in March, and then come to final decisions at MEPC 82 at the end of, towards the end of the year in October. At that time, there should also be preliminary understanding of what direction the basket of midterm measures are going to be. Another related stream of work that's going on is further development of the interim guidelines on fuel oil life cycle assessments, and this is meant to support the inclusion of a well-to-wake approach with the targets that have been agreed with the strategy. And lastly, I think a really important line of work that's also undertaking right now was agreement to undertake a review of the short-term measures that had been adopted and have been in effect since 2023. This is the EEXI and the Carbon Intensity Indicator, the CII. That review process is mandated by the regulations of MARPOL Annex 6 that's supposed to be completed by 2026. And that work, part of what the intersessional working groups and the MEPC working groups are going to be doing is further progressing work in that regard.
Well, thank you, Nick. Talking about big government and other experts, Jeanne, she's also a well-known in-depth expert on the opposite side, on the US side. So what's happening over here?
Thanks. Is this on? Okay. Thanks, Ollie. Shipping has to reach, net zero by 2050 or thereabouts, which is an ambitious target with an unclear path. The United States, as a member state of IMO, has no alternative but to reduce GHGs. This is going to take a strong commitment, a revolution in clean fuel technology, more efficient ship design, supportive infrastructure, and most importantly, extensive funding and investment and a massive scale-up. I'm focusing on what's happening in Washington over the next couple minutes and what the U.S. government has been doing. The commitment of the target is not enshrined in U.S. law, so it's largely set forth in a number of policy documents. The Biden administration has been clearly supportive of international efforts, and we'll see what continues with that if we have a change in administration. So some major policy efforts in the U.S. are really focused on the overall transportation system. We have the Ocean Climate Action Plan, which comes out of the White House with carbon neutral as one of its goals. We have the U.S. National Blueprint for Transportation Decarbonization, and the goal there is to release a maritime decarbonization action plan this year. That's an effort of 4 government agencies, largely DOE, Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Housing and Urban Development, which all have an MOU working toward common goals, and the National Strategy for Marine Transportation System, which is its goal for the next 5 years is cultivating a resilient and sustainable blue economy. On the legislative front, the U.S. is making unprecedented financial investments in federal grants, research, development, demonstration projects, capital financing, tax credits, and programs to reduce GHG. We have the bipartisan infrastructure law, which put over $6 billion over the next 5 years to reduce transportation-related emissions. We have the Inflation Reduction Act, which put over $370 billion in climate and energy investments, mostly tax credits and other incentives to reduce emissions. Both these laws, there are direct and indirect support for alternative fuels, new and emerging emissions technologies, infrastructure, and shipbuilding as well. Quickly on the fuel side, the bipartisan infrastructure law is in the process of establishing and incentivizing regional hydrogen hubs, which will be production, storage, dissemination in 7 areas throughout the United States. There are requests for information out there to get these hubs started to key up the infrastructure for hydrogen. The Inflation Reduction Act has allotted tax credits which can incentivize the decarbonization of vessels, hydrogen fuel cells, carbon capture, solar. On the infrastructure side, MARAD has port infrastructure grant programs, including small grant programs for smaller shipyards, which will incentivize the decarbonization of the smaller fleet, which we can talk about later. EPA is a Clean Ports program. DOT has other grant programs that can facilitate decarbonization in the maritime space. And MARAD, the Maritime Administration's Marine Highways Program, has the potential for infrastructure improvements for 29 designated maritime routes. There are also incentives for shipbuilding. There are loan programs, financial assistance, and others. I think what will be key is getting the word out there as to how these programs can benefit the public-private partnership between the industry and the government.
Well, thank you, Jeanne. So, Hamish, as the president of Star Bulk, now you listen to the 2 big government influences on your daily life. What are you doing with Star in terms of being more efficient and looking at the future?
Well, so right now, we're trying to do everything we can do to basically burn less fuel. And that's good for the environment. It's also good for our bottom line. So we're putting basically Mevis ducts or other similar ducts on all of our ships just in front of the propeller. And they give the water a twist opposite the twist of the propeller. And, the combination should have the water coming out without a twist, and that's more efficient. It saves, we think, about 5% of the fuel bill. We are trying much fancier bottom paints than we have been using in the past, which are much more expensive. They reduce friction with the water and again can save something like 5% of fuel fresh out of dry dock, but ideally keep the hull from getting fouled. And of course, the problem is that sometimes the paint gets messed up and then you have a very expensive paint job that has to be redone. We are also looking at ways to reduce hull fouling, other ways to reduce hull fouling. Apart from going slower, and the fuel consumption of a ship per hour per day is about roughly proportional to the cube of the speed. So a little bit slower, we burn a lot less fuel. But apart from going slower, hull fouling is the greatest impact on fuel burn. And if you have sort of standard bottom paint and you come out of dry dock and you go to a warm water port for 30 days, which sometimes happens with dry bulk, you can find that your hull is increasing your fuel consumption by 20%. And it's not unheard of to have a hull that's fouled enough to have 40% more fuel consumption than fresh out of dry dock. So keeping the hull clean is a very important thing to do, either by frequent hull cleanings, when we're in port, or what we're looking at are hull cleaning robot technologies. And we've tried a number of hull cleaning robots. Some of them work until you put them in the water. But, you know, none of them do quite what we want yet, and we hope the technology will advance quickly. You know, if you're going to use a hull cleaning robot, you know, once a week, you need probably very tough paint. And if you have very tough paint, probably that's not good at preventing fouling unless there's a hull cleaning robot covering the whole thing. So you have to have faith in the hull cleaning robot. And the other thing is that ports sometimes don't allow you to clean the hull in port because of the biological stuff that's coming off the ship. And so ideally, we want a robot that can operate while the ship is underway. But, you know, we're hoping for that. We're looking at ultrasonic anti-fouling technologies. You know, we're looking farther in the future at wind power, you know, kites in particular, and we're looking at carbon capture and sequestration, which we've tested, and it works. You know, it's expensive. So, you know, the payback on wind power isn't very good right now. Hopefully with carbon taxes that will get better. And there's no payback on carbon capture until there's a carbon tax.
So in today's market where you see a lot of ships are going now, not through the Red Sea, but around the Cape. So talking about speed, do you follow that pattern? And because of a longer voyage, more impact on the environment, do you maintain that vision of controlling the speed, or is it faster because it's a longer route?
Well, I think it's probably neither faster nor slower. At a given fuel price, at a given charter rate environment, you will tend to go with a given ship at the same speed regardless of the route you're taking. Now, the thing that can complicate that is CII. If the longer route is likely to give you a worse carbon intensity indicator, which it is likely, well, will it? No, it won't. It won't. So that's a problem with the CII. So no, you'll go the same speed to maximize profits, which of course every company wants to do. It will be the same speed.
Yeah, that's always the challenge. You touch on the CII and that if you're just lying a storage ship, you get penalized. But if you burn fuel, you do much better. Apostolos, from your position in Greece and working with McKinsey, you have sort of a different client set. So how different do the shipping companies that you deal with their decarbonization journey, and what do you see?
Thank you, Ole. I trust you can hear me properly, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Super. So I have the privilege of serving several shipping companies across geographies and also across segments. So from ferry operators, cruise lines, tramp carriers, and liner operators. And I think there's one thing in common, and that is that sustainability is part of the CEO agenda across all companies. So it's not a topic that is discussed somewhere within the organization. It's a topic which our CEO clients deeply care about and think throughout their week. I think that this is driven by different elements. Regulation is one of them, but it's not the only one. And depending on the segment, that varies. But for cargo operators, the commitments, the Scope 3 commitments of the cargo owners is a key driver. Another one is also the demand for green commodities, products that have been shipped in a low emissions way, as well as new cargoes that are coming up, which are alternative fuels, which are liquefied CO2. So all of those create a sustainability agenda that covers the decarbonization part, which is what I will explain more, which is driven by the regulation, but also creates an opportunity that several of those companies are thinking of. Now, particularly on the decarbonization, the clients that we serve and the companies that we work with, they think about it in three interconnected elements. The first one is the fleet. So what can I do with my fleet? And it covers a lot of the points that Hamish just mentioned. How do I make my fleet more efficient from a consumption point of view, which is beneficial in terms of the emissions, but also beneficial in terms of our bottom line. Slow steaming to the extent that they can influence it. And no, regarding their CapEx program, both on new buildings and in terms of conversions, developing a plan on what that could look like. And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty, but as we like to believe, having a plan beats not having a plan. So thinking through about the CapEx side of the fleet is important. The second element that most companies think about is the fuel. And when we talk about fuel, I think it's identifying what could be a potential sourcing pipeline for the different fuels. And it depends a lot to the extent, I mean, how fixed are the routes of the different shipping companies. For example, a ferry operator or a container liner has a much more predetermined trading profile than a tramp carrier. And for them, it's easier or it's more probable to take an early step and be a front runner on the fuel side. But it's definitely something that our clients think of, as well as who those potential suppliers could be, what could be the locations, and what are the capabilities required to actually make decisions. So there's a lot of new capabilities required, both on the vessel side, on the sea side, but also on the shore side. And the third point, which is linked with the business opportunity, is the commercialization. So decarbonization is coming at a cost. This is a given. Now, how that cost is recovered is one of the elements which is considered when developing a decarbonization master plan. And again, the capacity and the ability of different shipping companies to recuperate that cost differs. Typically, what we see is that companies that are in passenger segments like cruise lines or coastal or ferries have a higher ability to recover that cost. Then container liners have an ability to do it, or a relatively higher ability than tramp carriers. So we do see early steps of thinking through their strategy on how they can improve the commercialization of the decarbonization master plan. Now, in terms of proactiveness versus reactiveness, I think that this depends on the sector. It depends on the size of the company. It depends on the shareholding structure and the willingness of different shareholders to take a proactive stance. And it also depends on the geography. So we see different behaviors and willingness in clients that are based in the Middle East or in Asia compared to the ones which are based in Europe or in the US. I think three common, I would say, thoughts or three common attributes is that having a plan beats not having a plan, and that's something we discuss with all of our clients. I think the acknowledgement that the future is not a single fuel future is something which is important to comprehend. And the last one is what I believe is the imperative of efficiency. And I think it was also mentioned by Hamish before. And our estimations show that within this decade, 80% of the decarbonization is going to come from efficiency improvements. And when we look at the longer timeline until 2050, we estimate that 30% of that is going to come from efficiency. So it's important to get that right, but already crafting the plan for the other two pillars, which is the fuel and the commercialization of it.
Well, thank you so much for that. A very interesting angle on the problem. I wish we had another hour to discuss this topic because it's so interesting and so challenging. I just want to leave with one thought on today's conference of the Hellenic and Norwegian combination, that you've recently seen Greek owner ordering 6 VLCCs, dual fuel with LNG fitted. And then you have Norwegians ordering 2 VLCCs, scrubber fitted, conventional fuel, with about 116 million for the conventional fuel and 136, 140 for the dual fuel ship. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on sort of what directions are the Norwegians heading and the Greeks heading in the future, and what do they see on it? Is it just the price of the ship? Is it the vision? Is it a short-term issue? Anyone willing to close off this panel with a thought?
I'll just make a quick comment only on the U.S. flag fleet. I think a lot of folks think of the U.S. flag fleet as 180 vessels, which are the ocean-going fleet. But the U.S. is really an industry of about 40,000 vessels when you look at the tugs and barges and the domestics. There's going to be a whole different mix of what has to be done in the U.S. I just wanted to very quickly comment that there was a very interesting feasibility study done on 4 vessels that were doing various routes, Hawaii, U.S., Alaska, California, that the vessels ranged in age from 20 years, 40 years, 43 years, and 70 years old. And they looked at the hydrogen fuel cell technology and proved out the concept that these 4 vessels have the space, without too much of a retrofit problem, to actually operate efficiently on hydrogen fuel cells. If anyone wants the site, I'll pass it on. But there's a lot of different mix happening in the U.S. just because of the divergence in the fleet.
Sure. I mean, and I think one of the things that illustrates is that, you know, especially with the pace at which we're moving forward, and with a lot of the different solutions, certain things may work in certain situations and certain others may not work. So everybody's going to have their own formula and approach towards reaching their goals. And one of the things I think that I'd like to touch on, you know, in this regard is, of course, there are going to be a lot of sort of independent directions that some stakeholders are going to take depending on what works for them. But at the same time, the real concern or the real difference here is that it's not going to be a prescriptive approach. All of these regulations that are being developed are developed on a goal-based approach. So in other words, it tells you to target where you need to be, but it doesn't tell you how to get there. And as a result, there are a lot of these sort of, you know, sort of interrelationships or even conflicts between different regulatory regimes. And that's what's going to be different about this. Is it, again, it's not going to be a singular approach to this. And the idea of partnerships and collaboration is going to be very important to make sure things like Hamish just mentioned about the hull cleaning, and then of course poor policies that may restrict that. So obviously overcoming those types of barriers are going to be important through collaboration.
Yeah, and just on the LNG versus fuel oil VLCCs, first of all, I think it's kind of funny to think about a low-carbon VLCC. But, you know, it's not clear that LNG is low-carbon or let's say, low climate impact. You know, that's controversial. But, you know, I think if somebody's paying $20 million extra for a ship that can burn LNG, that's a bet on the LNG being cheaper than fuel oil in the future. I don't think it's a bet on decarbonization.
Apostolos, you want to wrap up your thoughts, if any, on that?
Yeah, I'm fully aligned with what we just said. I think those 2 examples are different business, you know, it's a different read of the future. And I don't think it's driven so much by sustainability, it's driven more by, you know, where they believe the opportunity is. I think my point is similar to what Nick said. I believe that a future which is going to be different than the present requires collaborations and partnerships. And I think we will be seeing more of those in the coming years in order to reach the targets for the industry.
Okay. Well, thank you so much to the panel. Thank you, Apostolos in Greece. Thank you so much.
Thank you.